Welcome to Healing the Patriarchy with Love podcast. I'm your host Luna, and together we're becoming rebels of the heart, one show at a time. Hello and welcome back to the Healing the Patriarchy with Love podcast. And today I've got a special guest for you, and her name is Alison Smith. Alison is a counsellor, teacher, writer, and coach who nurtures and empowers women to reach greater levels of self-awareness and to break through into their fullest, most heart and soul-centered selves. Alison, thank you so much for giving your time to come and join us today and speak to us here at Healing the Patriarchy with Love podcast. It's wonderful to have you with us.
It's great to be here, Luna, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Something that occurred to me when I was just kind of reeling off the list of things that you embody in this, in this plan on this planet. So, counsellor, teacher, writer, and coach. Mm-hmm. I kind of was thinking, wow, you must do an awful lot of listening. You must do a lot of listening. So I just wanted to kind of speak that and say, I actually feel really honoured that I get to listen to you today. And also that I get to facilitate a space where other people get to listen to you, because it's kind of like a role reversal, isn't it? And something that you maybe don't get as much of because you're the one that's always doing the listening.
Yes, that's interesting. That's kind of thrown me a little bit, a very unexpected direction we could go in there. But something that's popping into my mind is that I think we all have a superpower. Or a set of superpowers. Actually, I prefer to call them gifts. Yeah. And I have to admit that one of my core superpowers or gifts is listening. So you're right, I do spend a lot of time listening. Wherever I go, I'm wired to listen. So it's a kind of listening with all of my being, if you like. I grew up as a very sensitive child and learned how to listen, and I'm very grateful for my upbringing in the sense that I had to listen. And it's taken me off in a really important direction in my life. There's been lots of twists and turns in it, as I'm sure there has for everybody, but yeah, listening is pretty core to what I do, and it's pretty core to who I am and what I think is important. Thank you for the opportunity for me to be listened to. This is wonderful, and can I just also say that I love what you're doing with this podcast. It excites me, and that's why I said yes. Healing the patriarchy with love sounds like just what we need.
Yeah, thank you. I know we're quite in alignment. Like, I'm wondering, because you're such a deep listener, and I agree that it's a gift, and actually I think it's a gift that not many of us have. I think it's a unique gift. To be able to listen as deeply as you do, and I know, because I've experienced it, that you do indeed listen very deeply, and you pick up on things that other people they wouldn't pick up on that. I know that. So what's sort of coming to me now is I'm thinking about, since the pandemic, we know that the world has changed greatly around us, and it's changing. It's getting faster and faster. It's kind of picking up pace, isn't it, with its evolution? And most of us don't want it to go back to how it used to be. I think most of us want it to change. So I'm just wondering what kind of things your deep listening has picked up on. Have you picked up on any themes? It might be with the people you work with, or even just around you, kind of since the pandemic. What do you think the themes are that you've been hearing in the world?
Oh my goodness, that's a huge question, which I'm happy to have a go at. I love questions as well. Asking them and answering them. So let me have a think about this. The first thing that's that's sprung to mind is, yes, I totally agree. The rate of change that we're all going through right now, if we are aware of it and if we are conscious beings, and I don't mean that in a superior sense, I mean if we have the awareness of the evolution, because I feel like everyone is evolving. There's a lot going on within that, a lot going on. I feel like a lot of people are excited by that and really, really going with it. And then with that group of people, I'll put myself in that group, because that's where I found my place, if you like. Actually, that's where I actually found my work in the world, is to help others negotiate this, I don't know what you want to call it, turbulence is what I think it feels like for a lot of people. You know, like having your world turned upside down sometimes, depending on how rough the turbulence is. So I'm excited by it, and I feel like, you know, as a leader myself, as somebody who's willing to lead others, I feel like what I'm hearing, one of the things I'm hearing, is that there is actually a desire for simplicity, particularly with women who are a little bit older than me. I feel like sometimes it can be an age issue, because I think, you know, certainly my son, who's in his 30s, grew up with, just as the information age was beginning, you know, so he grew up with the internet and computers and phones and all of that. But a lot of the women that I work with who are older, you know, can actually remember steam trains and telephone boxes and, you know, the phone in the house and having to go to the corner of the street to go into a little red phone box with a coin to make a call to someone. And the only way you could get information was by going to a library, or if you were lucky to have a set of encyclopedias or some books in the house. But, you know, it wasn't always the right books, and you had to know where to look. But now we have information at the touch of our fingers, literally. We can find out anything we need to know. And that can be overwhelming. So I think that's where this desire for simplicity comes from. And also the desire to get real. So by that, I mean, you know, finding your true voice, even knowing that underneath all of the layers of conditioning that we've been carrying for a long time, millennia, even, you know, right underneath all of that. And it is a case of, you know, divesting the layers, like, you know, snake skins, or I tend to think of it more like going into a series of cocoons and then coming out with an awakening each time you come out of each cocoon. And each cocoon is kind of like a lesson. That's how I'm seeing it for a lot of people, including myself, because you know, I'm no different to anyone else in that respect. I'm going through my own evolution. So does that answer that question enough, or is there something else I need to say? I wonder. There's that, yeah, there's the desire for simplicity, the desire for realness, and there is something else that's just gone right out of my awareness. I'm sure it's very important if it's gone right out of my awareness. You know how things can be tricky sometimes like that. Yeah. Let me see if I can come back. Oh yes. This kind of goes with all of the information that's available to us, and of course the influence of social media as well, and the plethora of modalities, approaches. You know, if I want to find a specialist in healing somatic trauma, I can find one. If I want a specialist in releasing my voice, I can find one. If I want a specialist in understanding how to run my business more effectively. I can find many of those, that the leaders, the change agents, the thought leaders have become so niched. And I feel like this meets the need that people have to find the way that's right for them at the moment, but also that, I was going to say yearning, that yearning for soul union, which has manifested since the 1980s now, I would say, in terms of people, I'm talking about from the 1980s to now. So some of this might sound unusual to maybe younger listeners, but it started with the introduction of things like Buddhism and yoga into the West. So almost suddenly overnight, perhaps it started in the 60s actually rather than the 80s, but there was a resurgence in the 80s, I feel. People looking for transcultural areas of wisdom, shall we say, like yoga, meditation. Yoga and meditation are the ones that spring to my mind because those were the things that I was first introduced to when I was going through my first evolution in my mid-20s. And I'm in my mid-60s now, so that seems like a long time ago. Yeah, that was a long answer. And I could probably say more, but I feel like possibly we need to kind of shift a little bit.
Yeah. I think the simplicity, really, that was what stood out for me from what you were saying. And I think with all the options, you were talking about, there's lots more sort of niche markets now and things like that, with all these options, because people are being more authentic to themselves. So that is in itself creating niches.
Exactly.
But it also does make things more complicated because there's more options, there's more outlets, there's more different ways of getting things.
Yes.
And I think, our minds are just completely bombarded all the time with information because as you were talking about the technology and things like that. And I think people just need spaces kind of a little bit away from that, or where it's, just a bit calmer for the body to kind of relax and unfurl a bit from all of the bombardment. And I know one of the things that you do is create spaces online for women where they can tap more into their creativity. So do you want to kind of just maybe talk to us a little bit about that?
Could you just ask that question again, Luna? I think the internet just cut out a little.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I think we've had a couple of problems, haven't we, with the internet here? It looked fine on my end, so I apologise. Yeah, I was just saying that, people need kind of spaces where they can come away from the total bombardment of all the different choices and options and just kind of come back home to themselves in their body. And that I know that one of the things that you do is offer an online space for women where they can kind of tap into their own creativity and find their kind of like their voice through that. So I didn't know if you would maybe like to just talk to us a little bit about what you offer in that regard.
Yes, I can. Yes, thank you for asking that again. So when I first started my heart-centered, soul-centered business in 2017, it wasn't actually my intention to work online fully. But I discovered that. So I actually started off doing face-to-face work, as I had done a lot of face-to-face work in terms of counselling, which is how I started off on this journey in counselling during the early noughties. So I had some experience of that, and of course I was a teacher for many years as well. And so I gradually kind of became aware of the power of this is going to make me sound really old, the power of the internet, the power of the World Wide Web, and the potential of uniting and reaching and finding and discovering women from all over the world, not just as potential clients, but also as potential collaborators, friends, colleagues. Soul family, I guess, is what I started to feel that it was, you know, making these soul connections. So I started to create these online spaces, and just about the time that I had started all of that, we had the pandemic. And so fortunately, I mean, unfortunately for obvious reasons, because we were going through a pandemic, my online work took off at that point, because obviously people became aware of things like Zoom, and the potential of that became apparent round about that time, because it met a need for connection that had been removed because we weren't allowed to go out of the house. Seems funny talking about that now, but we weren't allowed to go out of the house at one point. Yeah. So that was the kind of social context within which I started to offer more and more things online. Although I do a retreat, face-to-face retreat in Crete as well every year, which I might talk about later. But the online spaces are, what sense shall I talk about these in? They're really sisterhood circles. First of all, I do a lot of work with groups of women, because I don't just do that, but the work that I do with groups of women in what I call sisterhood circles. And I was trained in circle work, as it was called then, in the early 90s. So I've been doing this work for a long time, although not with women. And it just seemed like a natural evolution of my work that I was called to bring women together in circle to be heard, seen, and witnessed. And that's really what it's about. It's about healing the sister wound, which, as you will know, is one of the wounds of patriarchy, through being seen, held, and heard by other women, and not just by being seen, held, and heard, but also by seeing, hearing, and holding other women in a sense, in a non-competitive sense, so that it heals and removes that thing that's out there, that even women should be in competition with each other. Women should be envying each other. Women should be not supporting each other. And we see that play out in different arenas in society, even now still. You know, there's plenty of examples I could give of that on a world stage, certainly. It can be so hard still for a woman, even now, with all of the healing that we've done, to step out and speak the truth as she sees it. And I mean in an aware sense. Again, I keep coming back to that word, awareness. So this isn't just about spouting out any old stuff on the internet, as some people seem to think it is. It's really about connecting with a deep part of ourselves that's been buried, and allowing that to emerge in a safe space. So when I say a safe space, I mean a space that has certain guidelines around it, such as confidentiality, such as the non-fixing guideline. You know, we're not there, nobody's there to fix anyone else. Really, I see myself as a facilitator. My other name, I mean, I know you mentioned earlier that I'm a poet, a coach, a counsellor, teacher, and so on. But the other name that I can give myself is that I'm a human potential facilitator. So I do things that sometimes are so subtle that you might not notice, that draws out of women who I work with now, draws out of them things that are lying dormant. And that's through the safe, unconditional, positive regard space. And I could talk forever about unconditional positive regard. Obviously, it's an idea that came from Carl Rogers and was core to my counselling training, but it's also core to the work I do with groups of women, and of course with my one-to-one work as well. So does that answer your question? I think it's about safety, creating that safe space to be seen, held and heard, in summary.
Yeah, absolutely it does. And I just want to say thank you to you for doing that work. You know, it's not easy work to do, because you're overseeing that space, and the women within it might find it difficult, and then, you know, you're the one that's overseeing it. So thank you so much for creating those spaces and holding the women through it. I really appreciate that you're doing that work in the world.
I think it's really important.
It is important, it is. And I think, you know, you were so eloquent in how you explained that to people, because, yeah, if you don't go to those circles, or maybe if you're a man that's listening to this, or, you know, it might just be something really alien to you, and you might think, what on earth are those women doing when they gather online? But actually, you know, it's really quite deep, and I consider it to be sacred work to attend a circle.
Yes.
And it's a brave thing to do. It is brave, because we do bare our souls in these places, as you, I'm sure you will witness many times. You know, we do that. We do kind of go there and do that. I love that you came up with the name Human Potential Facilitator, because I can really sense that in you. And I have done some work with you, so I know that you have also facilitated my human potential in me, definitely.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Oh, no, thank you. What I really wanted to touch on there, though, I did hear you say about, you know, you hold face-to-face retreat in Crete, and I know that Crete is like a sacred place to you. It's almost like a pilgrimage almost when you go there, isn't it? Because it's a real place that you've fallen in love with. So I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about, you know, how you fell in love with it, and then maybe a bit about the retreats that you hold there for women.
Oh my goodness, that's such a juicy question. I honestly, I could do a whole series of, I could do a TV series about Crete. I think there's so much to say. I could write a book about it, and maybe I should.
Yeah.
So I first discovered Crete in my, oh gosh, my son was quite young, so it would have been in the 1980s, and there's the 1980s again. Huge awakenings going on in the 1980s, including my own awakening as a mother, obviously. And a few years after that, a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to go on holiday abroad. I had only been away once with the school, and that had been to Paris. And I was entirely bewitched by Paris. I have to say, I was 17 and I didn't want to come home, and I felt the lure of Europe. You know, I felt that call to be somewhere other than England, which I actually feel is quite, in lots of ways, is a very insular place. Maybe it's because of the empire and colonialism and all of that kind of inward looking stuff that we do, and the weather, of course. But I felt the lure of Europe, the lure of travel. But when my friend said, you know, let's go to a Greek island, my first impression was, oh, I'm not sure about this. It's going to be all people basting themselves on beaches and coaches everywhere and half-finished buildings. And I had all these stereotypical imaginings about what a Greek island might be like. And maybe it was my ego putting up barriers, because she was going, oh my goodness, Alison's about to discover something really important about herself. We better put up a few barriers here. But the barriers were easily dissolved, because my friend, you know, showed me pictures in a book, because we didn't have the internet, we looked at books from the library about Greek islands, and you know, the whitewashed walls and the unreal blueness of the sky and the sea, and the mountains, and it was the landscape that at first drew me, and I said yes. But what happened when I got there was something other. So in brief, I would describe it as a soul connection. I felt immediately at home in a way that I don't feel anywhere else. There are reasons why I don't live in Crete, and reasons why I probably won't in this lifetime live in Crete. Partly because it's part of Greece and we've now left Europe and there's all of those things going on. But Crete itself has a history which is pre-Greek. And it's an island which was inhabited by a people that are called the Minoans, but that was really a title that Arthur Evans invented for this incredibly beautiful civilization which existed, we think, on matriarchal lines. And we're talking about, 2000 BC, when in England we were still living in caves, and the Minoans were making jewelry, making beautiful pottery, having incredible social gatherings. They had a religion, a spirituality, which was based on the presence of the divine, the presence of the goddess in everything and everyone. I could say so much about that, but I felt all of that, and I felt it in the music, and I felt it in the land, and I felt it in the people, and I felt it in the rituals, and I felt it in the warmth on my skin, and I felt it in how I felt there, such a oh gosh, an aliveness, a sense of physical aliveness, such that I'd never felt. It was really the beginning of my physical awakening, I think, because I was about to say something which is related to that. So physical awakening, by that I mean I suddenly became aware. Was it sudden? I did become aware that I had a body. Which prior to that point, amazingly, or maybe not, if you're listening to this and thinking, yeah, I can really resonate with, feeling disembodied. But I was all head, I went to uni to study philosophy. It was all about the head and the mind. And as far as I was concerned, I was going to carry on the rest of my life just using my mind and just dragging my body along with it, But then I went to Crete and all of that was blown right open. And I felt myself to be the sensual being that I now am, alive, fully alive. Feel quite emotional as I remember that. It was when we got up in the morning and I opened the shutters and I saw the colour, I saw that the vividness of the colours in Crete. And I know you get that in certain areas of the Mediterranean, it's the quality of the light. But I hadn't seen this before. So that was the first thing. And then we went for a little walk down to a local beach, and there was a kingfisher sitting on a rock, and I could see all of the colours and the feathers and shining in the sunshine. And then I looked up the hill and I saw a woman in black walking around a field tending her crops. And it was like I'd stepped back into time, and I started to feel like I'd had a deep and long connection with the island, possibly prior to this lifetime. I could say more, but that's probably enough for now.
Wow, I can really sense your connection with the island. And it's funny because when you were talking about it, and it was things that I don't know about it. I don't know anything about Crete, but kind of talking about how it was kind of they were creating jewelry and this different type of spirituality and things like that. And I can see how that's almost like a land that culture and history is almost kind of like reflecting your soul's frequency. So I'm not surprised at all that you feel at home there. And that you would choose, to spend as much time as you can there without actually, physically living there. So do you want to tell us a little bit about, how many retreats have you done there? I know you've done at least one. Do you want to kind of tell us a little bit about those?
I've run 2 retreats in Crete now. The very first one was 2019. And funnily enough, I'd wanted to do it for, gosh, at least 20 years. This was a thing that I put off and put off and put off for about 20 years. I find it hard to believe at the moment that I'd put it off that long. But it was a kind of coming together of various circumstances that led me to feel free enough and to feel invited enough to actually do it. And I did it with a dear friend of mine, Laura, and we ran it together. And oh my goodness, it was so magical. We hired a beautiful centre on the north coast, which is run by another friend of mine who is a woman who married a Greek man a long time ago, and she now runs this healing centre on the north coast of the island. And we ran our retreat there, and it was called Calling in the Muse. And it was incredible. I mean, the women who attended Calling in the Muse came home and are still feeling the effects of that retreat now. Real blockages, real long held blockages were loosened in 4 days. And it began as soon as they stepped onto the island, and continued and continues to happen. The women I'm talking about will say even now, that was an unforgettable experience. So that was 2019, and it was a joint effort, again, with Laura and I. And then due to the pandemic again, we planned to do another one in 2020, the following year, but obviously we couldn't for a lot of obvious reasons. And it got postponed, very frustratingly, I have to say, on my behalf about 4 times. And due to all of that, all of the things that were going on at the time, Laura decided that this wasn't for her at this point in time. Having said that, we are still friends, and we're still going to work together. And she's someone I respect and love incredibly dearly, and is a very important person for me. And I ran the next one in Crete single-handedly, and this was called Awaken, Arrive, Actualize, which is my 3-step process that I realised that this is what I've been doing for a long time, but it's only become clear that it goes through these three separate phases. So the retreat was called Awaken, Arrive, Actualize. And that was the first time I'd really taken women through that process in Crete. And it was very different to the first retreat, and all retreats are different. But this again was very powerful in a different way. My own skills in facilitating and delivering were massively up-leveled this time. And that retreat has led me on to evolving new ideas, offerings, things that I want to put out there in the world. And the most amazing thing about this last retreat was the venue. I actually feel that when you're running a retreat, it's very important. I know it's important for me if I'm attending a retreat, but I feel that this is really fundamental to what I offer. And that is, I do not want to sleep in bunk beds, and I do not want to share a bathroom. Fine if you want to do that, but what I run are luxury retreats.
Yeah.
So this is a chance for anyone who wants to get away from their entanglements, shall we say, and be completely looked after for a week. Looked after in terms of the setting, looked after in terms of the food, looked after in terms of the sessions, looked after in every sense. So we had this venue with its beautiful garden, and at the end of the garden we had our own beach. And that is very rare in Crete. You know, you don't get many houses that have, not technically its own beach, but it had a beach right at the end of the garden, which no one else was going on. So it was virtually our own private beach. And obviously we did a lot of sessions on the beach and near the beach, and the continual sound of the ocean and the beautiful, comfortable beds and powerful showers. You know, it all lends to this feeling of being looked after, which I think a lot of women have missed, you know, in their lives, allowing themselves to be looked after and to have all of their needs taken care of. It was really quite transformational. Aside, you know, even before we started the program itself, we also had a beautiful outing to an incredibly potent place on the island, and we conducted a sunset ceremony on the beach of letting go, where each woman let go of something that they've been carrying for a long time. And we continued to work with that the next day, to actually, once it was released, to then bring in, to actualize what the next phase of their work in the world was to be. And certainly with two of the women who attended, I'm seeing that rolling out in terms of increased potency in the world, and, you know, doing things that they had never expected they would have been able to do, things that they'd never done before. Started even before they came to Crete. As soon as they committed to it, things were happening that they'd never done before. You know, like spending a week in Crete before the actual retreat, and some time after in Crete as well, not just coming for the retreat. You know, so that experience of solo travel, which a lot of women have never done before, is, you know, really scary, risky thing to do. But it's, I know from my own experience when I've done it, is it's an incredible learning experience. So yes, I was the priestess of my domain in heaven on that retreat. And I'm planning something a bit different for 2024, not 2023. There's going to be a UK retreat happening in 2023, but in 2024 we're going back to Crete with some dear colleagues of mine. There's an idea cooking to host a part retreat, part women's conference on the island, and I'm very, very excited about that. The whole place has a kind of receptivity, you know, you feel held there.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
I really like, sorry,
that
Alison.
allows that gives you a sense of safety and a sense of permission, you know, permission to express yourself, permission to take risks, permission to expand your awareness of who you are. It's like an opening, you know, a flowering, a blossoming. Just like a flower opens in the sunlight, you know, that's the feeling that I get when I step onto the island. And I've enabled women to feel that feeling as well. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, goodness me, that sounds so beautiful and like such a lovely, deep but yet transformative space, but so gentle with it. I can feel a gentleness, like you say, the flower kind of opening to the sun. It's not forced. It's just that kind of like the natural opening that comes from the space that's created and held. So that's beautiful. And I'm very interested for this women's conference. That sounds exciting too.
Yeah, it's still cooking. It's cooking.
It's still cooking. You're just gathering the ingredients, are you?
I am indeed, yes.
Yeah. But what
doing a bit of chopping as well. Doing a bit of chopping.
A bit of chopping. Pruning
and growing. Yeah.
I noticed the language for the name, you know, the way that you give your retreats a name. That kind of appeals to me as well, because you know, awaken, arrive, actualize, they're really good words. I like your use of language to kind of set the tone and the intention as well there. It's a really good use of language. And so that just kind of, I guess, probably brings me to what will probably be my last question to you, which is just kind of like, we haven't really touched on you as a writer. We've touched on you as kind of like counselor, coach, teacher, woman, but not as a writer. So do you want to just kind of talk to us a little bit about you as a writer?
Yes, again, I can talk for a long, long time about this. It is deeply, deeply fundamental to who I am. I've always been a writer, always, 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 through possibly many lifetimes, but in this particular lifetime, it really... shall I tell you a little story?
Yeah, do. Yeah.
So this is how it came about that I realized that I was a poet, or realized what poetry could be and do. I had dabbled a bit, you know, at school when your teacher says things like write a story, and I remember just getting totally lost in that. You know, it was what I loved most of all was just permission to write. Teacher saying you've got the next hour to write a story was like heaven for me, and I didn't want it to end. In fact, I remember getting to the end of the hour thinking, oh, he's going to stop me at any minute. Oh no, I don't want to stop writing this story. I'm just so in this whole process of creation that writing really is. And so it had been stories, a little bit of poetry at school, and friend and I were writing a novel, you know, this sort of stuff. And then I did A-level English literature when I was in the sixth form, and we'd studied the poems of Dylan Thomas, so I had all of that rolling around in my consciousness, my awareness. Dylan Thomas is one of my favorite poets. He was the one who started me off on this path, along with Mrs. Askew. So Mrs. Askew said, I think she must have just been thinking, because I know this as a teacher myself, you think, oh my God, I've got to give them some homework. What am I going to ask them to do? And she said, I want you to go home and I want you to write a poem. And you know what? That's literally what I did. I didn't even go to afternoon lessons. I went home and I wrote a poem. I did what I was actually told, and I got home and I was really, really hungry. So I thought, being a teenager at the time, I loved chips. I mean, I still do love chips. What am I saying? Chopped up the potatoes, put the deep fat fryer on as we had. You know, gosh, we used to cook chips in, you know, animal fat. I would never do that now, but this deep fat fryer that we had in the house, put the heat on, got it heated up, chopped the chips, got it all ready. Then I went into the dining room and I started to write. And do you know, I nearly set the house on fire because I just got totally lost in the poem and completely forgot that I got the fryer on ready for the chips. So that really showed me how, when I reflect on it now, how completely immersed I was in that process, and also Hunger. I mean, I do still write really well when I'm hungry. It's strange. Somehow having a full belly is not that great for my creativity. But I think it stems from that point of actually feeding myself with poetry. And I just started and wrote my first, what I feel was a proper poem, not just, what do I mean by that? It felt like it was really my voice. And I really do believe now, decades on, that poetry is the voice of the soul. And that is why it is so appealing to people right now, because people are wanting to, especially the women that I work with, are wanting to express this real truth that they have inside themselves that's been buried for a long, long time. And poetry is the voice of the soul. And I discovered this when I was 17. Now, the reason I discovered this was because I experienced an awakening at that time. As soon as I'd written that poem, I had expressed my voice after having had it silenced. And I won't go into how it was silenced, except to say that I was, how shall I put this? Not encouraged, to say the least, to have any opinion at all, not even at school or at home, about anything. I was very, very shy, and that was because I was frightened to speak. And then I found poetry, and suddenly I knew who I was. And that, I don't think I was aware that I knew who I was, but I know now that that's what happened. So that was when I was 17, and it never left me. I was always in touch with the muse after that. Wrote hundreds and thousands of poems after that. And so I'd always defined myself as a poet. I've also since worked with poets. I've taught poetry. I taught poetry for 27 years in various schools across the northeast of England. And yeah, working with poets has been amazing as well, both at their workshops, but also inviting them to run workshops for my students. I've even been an exam marker of the poetry paper, which was fantastic for me at a time when I needed a bit of extra money, but also the pleasure of reading young people's responses to poetry was like just joy for me, you know, really joyful. To feel that young people were getting it, you know, they were getting that there's this revolutionary way of expressing yourself that is beyond the rational mind, that you can access these deeper layers of yourself through metaphor. And that's what it's about. It's about metaphor. It's metaphor that connects us, everyone, with the what Jung called the collective unconscious, which is the deep well of experience. I guess some people call it the Akashic records, you know, that deep well of experience, and archetypes and energy that is available to us all, but mostly outside of the rational mind's awareness. And our society actively encourages people to keep that outside of their awareness. But it's only through certain experiences, and writing poetry is one of those experiences, that you can access this well of knowing, this well of, it's really hard to describe this in words because it's more like a feeling, but it's like this joyous feeling of flying, you know, and also a flow and flying, flow and flight, just taking flight with who you are, and the freedom of that, you know, experiencing freedom and liberation from the cages of your limiting beliefs. So that's what poetry is to me. And I learned that by having permission. I'll never forget Mrs. Askew saying, I want you to write a poem. I am so grateful that she asked that question at that time of me. I don't know what would have happened if she hadn't asked that question. Teachers are so important.
Yeah, teachers are important. Absolutely, they are. So I've been a bit cheeky and I've asked if you would bring one of your poems on and you would kind of read that to us. So do you have one that you would like to read to us now, just as we're kind of wrapping things up?
I do indeed. And as I told you earlier, it was basically quite hard to choose a poem to read for your podcast here. But in the end, I chose this poem. It's called Beloveds. And I think it was written in one of my own workshops, because what I do is I write alongside the women I'm working with. And sometimes these things take shape later, not necessarily, poetry has its own time for emergence. But this one emerged, and I haven't even got a date on this. I think I wrote this a few months ago, so it's very new.
Okay.
Quite new. And I'm not even going to say what it's about. I'm just going to read it.
Yeah. Okay, I like that. Yeah.
So it's called Beloveds. Each of us has her own shape, defined by the sky, revealed by the light. Some of us are islands, beloveds of oceans, reachable by flight. Each of us is a rising, a miracle, a glorious surprise, created by all-seeing sight. Mirrored in the cool, dark deep of our below, we are here and there. We call to you now. We come to you gently in this memoried night. We want you to know that you are possible, seemingly permanent, invisibly shifting, sublime, beloveds of no time.
Wow. That's really touched me. That felt very very soulful. It was like if the soul had a voice, as you said, that is what poetry is. That kind of sums that up for me. That's what that felt like to me.
Thank you. It is. It often feels like a deeper truth.
Yeah. I really got that. I felt like I was talking of flight and flow. I kind of felt like I was, sort of taken in flight by the soul, just listening to that. So thank you for sharing that one. It's absolutely beautiful. And thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and sharing so beautifully about what you do in the world. And I am so grateful that you exist in the world, that you are how you are, and that you do what you do. And for all of your offerings, thank you. And also thank you for allowing me to listen to you today. It has been a privilege.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just about to say thank you to you as well for inviting me into your wonderful space. You are a gift to the world as well, and I'm really glad I'm connecting with you, and I love what you're doing here with this podcast and with your other offerings. And it has actually been such a pleasure to share, and as you said at the beginning, to be listened to by you. So I thank you for that.
No,
I've loved every minute.
Yeah, it's been great. I've loved it. I've been fascinated, and I always think, I could do with about another 10 hours because there's so much I want to ask you and I'm so interested. But, you would be welcome back anytime. But for now, do you want to just kind of let people know, if there's listeners that are thinking, I'm really interested in Alison's offerings, where can they find you? Do you want to just kind of let them know that?
Yes, I can. So I do have a website. Now, the thing is, it is new. The website's new. So probably by the time your listeners are listening to this, if I give you my website address, you'll actually be taken to the new website. But the old one is quite nice too. So I'll give you my website address. It is www.thegardenway.co.uk. So that's my website. Okay. And if you visit my new one, especially, there's lots of things to read in there. My blog's in there, and there's a free book about how to live a life in alignment with your gifts. And you can explore and read and just enjoy the whole visual feast of it. Also, I have a free Facebook group which is called the Women's School of Metamorphosis, which you're very welcome to join. Obviously, if you're a woman who, I do work with women. This is not because I won't work with men, but it's because I'm called to work with women specifically at this point in our story. So the Women's School of Metamorphosis is a free group where you will be inspired and supported and given support in your transformation, really. And it's kind of like a starting point for the journey that I take women on. And you can go on to do other things, but that'll be all on the website. You can go on to do one of my other offerings after the free Facebook group, but that is there if you want to come and take a look and get a feel for it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Alison, and thank you so much to our listeners, and I'll be back again soon with another amazing guest. Thank you so much, Alison. Bye, everyone. You've been listening to the Healing the Patriarchy with Love podcast with Luna Anna. Subscribe and follow to join the tribe of Rebel Hearts.